Welcome to this month's episode of Short Clip Case Studies, brought to you by Natera Performance Solutions.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Tay. Today I'll be presenting a case study on strength training for Paralympic swimmer Yip Pin Xiu. There'll be three areas that we look at for planning the training program: the need analysis, periodization, and exercise selection. For need analysis of Yip Pin Xiu, one, she's diagnosed with Charcot-Marie tooth. It is an inherited disorder that causes nerve damage, which affects the arms, legs, and peripheral nerve. And in para-swimming, classification itself is from S1 to S10, with a lower number showing a more severe activity limitation than a higher number. As for Yip Pin Xiu, she was initially classified as an S5, dropping to an S3 and an S2 since 2016. So an S2 class mainly relies on the arm for swimming. The hands, trunks, and legs function is limited due to coordination problem. And one of it is she's unable to grip her backstroke bar compared to the past, and she has to be anchored by a coach. Another thing we look at is interaction of energy system, trying to understand for 50-100 backstroke for Paralympic swimmer, which energy system are they falling under. So looking at an Olympic backstroke, 100-meter backstroke swimmer, the average time is about 58.43 seconds. For Yip Pin Xiu, her 50 meters and 100 meters backstroke is more than that at 102.04 and 216.61 seconds. If you look at the energy systems interaction-wise, a typical Olympic women's backstroke will use a glycolic system, while for para swimmers, she's looking more at the aerobic system, even though both are swimming at 50-100, but the limitation of not being able to use her lower limb, there's extra time taken for it. In terms of periodization itself, the coach uses a 3 up, 1 down periodization. And for her S&C wise, we go through the classic example of strength endurance, max strength, strength power, and power phase. And this is what her typical week will look like. The key area I'd like to draw to your attention is where her gyms are in relative to her key set swims. So if you look at it, she has a Monday gym, and the following day is a key set swim. And typically Wednesday, at the start of the season, is typically off, but as we build into the training program, she typically have a third session on a Wednesday. And on Friday, her gym, she has a gym session in the morning and a key sets swim in the afternoon. So because of logistics and COVID itself, this is what is planned for her. And in order for the gym to, or rather her strength training to not affect the key sets, there's a couple of areas that I look into to try to mitigate these issues. So on top of me planning for S&C programs, I have my colleagues from the sports physiologist, sport biomechanics, and sport medicine itself that helps her with her program as well. So from a sports physiologist itself, the things they look at are from her key sets, how much distance she swims, how much hop, and the swim time, the heart rate. So with this, it gives me an idea of how she's progressing, or how the coach is progressing with her key set swims, and how does the strength training, whether is it before or during the day itself, is affecting her swim time. Of course, from the sports biomechanics itself, they look at her race, her start time, and of course her stroke rate. But depending where she is in a season, for example, maybe like the start season, maybe stroke rate is something they try to look at to get the optimal cycle per minute. So thus in the weight room, we try to work into that. But of course, once she hit an optimum stroke rate, then the next thing we try to look at is the force production. How can we optimize that stroke rate she has to be able to swim faster? For the medical side, of course, other than the typical physio appointment, she does work with physio quite a bit on like stretching stuff, as shoulder flexion and adduction, range, core stability work such as dead bug. So knowing what the physio does helps me because I don't need to repeat certain exercises that's already done in physio. So with that, we could keep her session more compact, and end of the day is we want to have a bigger output with less time spent. And so far from the teamwork itself, we can see one of the good things that helped her during this Paralympic was she has close to zero downtime leading up to Paralympic. And if all these feedbacks that's given, it helps us, to move her across week by week. So as much as the season is planned 3 up, 1 down, and we know where we are going to go from phase to phase, but within a week itself, sometimes things may not always go according to plan, as there's a lot of other factors affecting performance. So understanding where she is during that week, or is it just an acute phase, or is it something more than acute phase, does helps to tailor the S&C program itself. So at the start of S&C program, typically you go through a warm-up stretch, as the reason being she's wheelchair bound, so she typically has a lot of tight hip flexors, hip region, and in swimming itself, she needs to be elongated or be long. So going through all these stretches does help to improve her range and get her to be a bit longer. So this example is her open book that she does. So the next thing we look at exercise selection. For exercise selection, there's 2 key points that we do look at: force production and velocity, how fast she's moving in a gym. So with that, we have your max strength, speed, power, and speed itself. And the most basic fundamental of it is producing force, which is mass times acceleration. In terms of exercise selection itself, as you can see from this paper by Sukamil, he looks at hypertrophy, strength, and power, and in each phase, there are numerous exercises that we all use. And of course, from his study, he looks at which exercise methods has a higher potential. So other than understanding from what kind of exercise is higher potential, I also need to understand my athlete, what kind of limitations he or she has, and at a particular phase at the start of the season, whether certain things will be used or not. Yeah, and so using that, when we put together the force velocity curve, this is how we work through the different stages and phase. So for max strength, typically we use eccentric training, bilateral exercises. For strength, speed, complex training, power, ballistic training. For speed, strength, and speed, typically this is done in a pool. For speed strength, we'll be using hand pedals, parachute belts, and for, of course, speed, as specific as we can get, is an all-out swim. So in this way, we could spread out the force velocities curve, both in the weights room and in the pool. In order to help her lift lift the weights, as you know, she doesn't have any grip strength. We do use hooks and grips to help facilitate this. So this is an example of a hook grip that she used for a Let's Pull Down machine for both pull up and chin up. And next one, we look at chin up. As both pull up and chin up is something that is one of the core exercises that she used quite a bit. I also need to understand, in terms of pull up and chin up, what does the science say, what does journal article says on it. So for this paper itself, looking at the pull up and chin up, both are quite similar in terms of strength gain. Okay, and in order for strength gain, the minimum threshold that this study shows is 50 to 60%, which is this red line across. So anything less than that, you won't typically see a much of strength gain. So for bicep itself, will be a chin up. Your infraspinators are quite similar. For your lower traps, you target it more during the pull up. For your pecs, your chin up does have a higher potential. While for your external oblique and your erector spinae, even though they both of them do not hit your strength gain for 50 to 60%, but for the paper itself, it does state that it's useful for promoting endurance training of muscular stabilizers of the trunk. So the MVIC, which issues from both the pull up and chin up, it's quite similar to someone doing a plank and side plank. So even though it's not high, like 50-60%, but it's useful for endurance training, kind of extrinsic muscle stabilizer. So next thing we look at in terms of, let's say, maybe a let's pull down is how can you progress a let's pull down? You do want to push the weights, but it's not always possible, as the jump in the let's pull down machine does jump quite a bit. So in order to overcome this limitation, we do use isometric and eccentric training to help overcome this, and at the same time able to produce high force. So example of isometric training that she does. So isometric training itself, same thing from a paper done by Danny, that is safer than dynamic mode, which is important for me. As you know, in swim, she does use quite a bit on shoulder rotation and stuff. So if I could reduce the risk of injuries, it does help. Less fatiguing than dynamic mode. It's also important. This is also useful as the season progresses. The amount of volume she does in the swims will typically pick up. And sometimes it's not possible for both the weights room and the pool session to pick up at the same time. So sometimes to help offload this fatigue, we do use isometric training. Superior in increasing joint angle specific strength. So this, I guess, with the physio kind of things that she's weak at a certain angle, so we might use isometric training to target that. Increased muscle tendon stiffness associated with increased isometric and dynamic rate of force development, greater increase post-isometric training as compared to dynamic mode of strength training. So all this is stated, on the ground, one of the reasons why we do use it is because the weights that she does for the legs machine does increase quite a bit. And after a certain point, it's difficult to keep pushing the weight. And one way we help to maintain that high force output rather than switching exercises while dropping the weight. We try to keep the weight similar, but we increase the time under tension with isometric that it does to help increase that strength. From there, we do progress with eccentric training, and just take a look at how does she does the eccentric training. So with eccentric training, one of the few benefits that is important for us is high muscle force, which is what we want to achieve, a low metabolic demand, and similar to isometric training itself, to help lower the fatigue that she feels. As typically with isometric training and eccentric training, is typically, it's not at the start of the season. We're looking at maybe the second or third month onwards already. So with that, the amount of volume that she does will have picked up. So in order to mitigate that risk of overtraining, isometric training and eccentric training does help it with that low metabolic demand, and at the same time being able to have the high muscle force. And with that, we are able to have rapid gains in muscle strength and muscle mass. When we do progress further down, looking at the strength speed, we do use complex training quite a bit. So this example of a lats exercises that she does, that she pair up. So similarly with complex training, it's a back-to-back. So after she does a heavy strength exercise, like from the lats pull down, she will shift to explosive exercise, which is lighter in weight, but focusing more on the speed end of the spectrum. Okay, next up we look at another one using the bench. So similarly, we use a heavy weight. Okay, as for this, it's just a demo, so there's no weight on the bar. But typically in training, we just try to push the weight as much as we can, pair it with an explosive exercise or something specific to what she will do in a swim. So these complex trainings help to target both the high force and high velocity side of the curve. Next up, we look at some specific training that she does that will mimic her backstroke. First one with a cable backstroke. So for this specific training, as she does it, it's not done throughout the season, and it's not, I would say, not one of our staples. So we do pick and choose when she does this. Reason being, we don't want an overuse injuries of her shoulders. So typically we use these exercises maybe at the start of the season, where she need to build out her cadence, and in a pool session, as a pool session volume is not so high, we could use all such exercises to mimic and help build her stroke rate, and also closer to competition, just to have some similar backstroke movement, but the volume will be very low when he does that. And when during in the middle of season when her volumes are high, typically we do not do this unless that she's faced some issues in her stroke that she want to rectify on in the gym. But if not, if she does it well in the pool, we typically would not touch such exercises and just focus more on just producing high force in the weights room. This next one is the same thing, it's the boxing backstroke. Okay, we move on next to core. Same thing is a bit of progression through it. An example we use is just a plank, a side plank. That's how we progress. For the plank, she does that. As we progress, she'll do a mat ball slam. And your TRX will out. Then for the side plank, from there you progress to lateral mat ball throw. And some resistance band oblique as well. Finally, as you can see from my slides, there's a lot of factors that we do come into play, similar to this slide by Greg Huff. In terms of training quality, the things that will affect it, such as the sports science support that I have from my colleagues, what they picked up in terms of biomechanics itself, or even sport medicine. So as a team, we try to come together so that we do not, conflict each other's training, and we try to keep her training compact as much as we can. Competitions, how well she swims, and the training what is done, whether can she bring that out into a competition phase itself. Of course, her ability, what she can do, cannot do, what she's good at, what her weaknesses. Trying to fine tune that as much as we can to focus on her strength. Facility and equipment, know what same thing like the hooks and the grips, how can we work around it to find exercise similar to what maybe an able body is able to do, and bring it down to help her to translate that. And of course, end of the day is trying to produce high force as much as we can. And working together, the coach, his knowledge, and what his plan is for her, how they're trying to progress, whether from the weights room wise, do we go in the same line of progression, or at times maybe it's important maybe for her to focus more on the swim side, and for the S&C side, it's just a support. So that changes as we move along the season, and definitely all this does affect training quality and end of the day, athlete's performance. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time.